Gary Kemp, welcome to A Breath of Fresh Air. Fabulous to have your company. If you don't mind, we're going to take a walk down memory lane and retrace your steps to lead us right up to where you are today. So, what I know about you is that you grew up in Islington in London, and you actually started playing guitar and writing songs at the age of 11.
Yeah.
Did your parents condone all the music?
I just think they did really. We never had records in their house. Let me just explain a little bit of background of how we were.
Please.
So it's a pretty poor working class background in that, we lived in a rented accommodation. We had no. We took up a floor of a house in London, North London, and we had no bathroom. We the house also had two other families in it, and we all shared one outside lavatory in a yard. And and I lived like that till I was 15 with my brother, who's 2 years younger than me, Martin. And but it was a house of love, most certainly. And my dad was a printer in a factory, and he did everything he could to put bread on the table. My mum was a dinner lady in a local school. And when I was 11, this is about 1971, uh, for Christmas, I was given a guitar. And my dad had seen it in the window of a local electrical shop for £5, which was a lot of money. And I was I woke up to this guitar one morning and a book by Bert Weedon, which is a bit of a classic, called Play in a Day. I talked to a lot of other musicians who also grew up on that book as well and learnt their first few chords. So I was a bit disappointed at first because I actually probably wanted a toy, but I knew those sort of days were over now. And I sort of went off into my bedroom over the next few weeks and taught myself these chords. And there were songs in this book, and I think one of them was something like "If I Had a Hammer," which was four classic chords: C, A minor, F, G. And I thought, well, I really like those chords, but I really don't like this tune, and I don't like these words. So I wrote my own tune and my own words over the top, and showed them to a teacher at school. I then wrote another song called "Alone," which my mum said, "You can't play that to anyone because they'll think you're depressed." And but I ended up playing those two songs at my school prize giving at the end of that year. And in present, handing out the prizes, was this amazing man called Trevor Huddleston, who was the Bishop of Stepney. He was also the head of the anti-apartheid movement in the UK.
Wow.
And he ended up coming to our house, surprised us because obviously we had no telephone, and he just arrived at the house a few days later. And it was a Thursday night because Top of the Pops was on. And and I remember Top of the Pops was on because I remember when he sat in our living room, much to my mum's absolute horror, that we had a bishop sitting in the living room and it wasn't tidied. Um, uh, Maggie May was being sung by Rod Stewart on Top of the Pops. And he come round to give me a Philips cassette recorder, which were kind of brand new science. And he said, every time you write a song, I want you to record it and send it to me. And
Wow.
and I did that. And
Wow.
for a while, I didn't meet him again until 1985.
How incredible.
Anyway,
So,
when I met him, because when he said to me, when he was giving me this cassette recorder, and I remember it quite clearly, he said, I gave a trumpet to a jazz trumpet player in Africa. So I like to do these sort of things. And he also said that he just organized one of the first charity concerts with the Who at the Oval. And but he said, so when I re-met him in '85, he actually got in touch with me and asked me to play at an anti-apartheid concert in Clapham Common, which was going to be in front of 100,000 people. And I'd just written Through the Barricades, so I was going to perform that on my own. And when I got there, he said, "This is an amazing day for me." He said, "Because I gave a trumpet to an African trumpet player many years ago, and he's here too." And it was Hugh Masekela.
wow. How incredible. What a great story. So, I mean, you were right into it from such a tender age. When did you actually decide that you wanted to form a band?
But I think that was a kind of a thing that was just apparent to me straight away, pretty much. I fell in love with glam rock and Mark Bolan, T Rex, and Electric Warrior was my first album that was given to me for the following Christmas, I think. And and then David Bowie, of course. But I was into all kinds of music. I was listening to everything, and there was a when I got to about 14. No, I remember actually distinctly miming "To Stay With Me" by the Faces when I was 11 in front of at a play school in front of a load of with a bunch of my mates, all pretending to be the Faces and Rod Stewart. And it was in front of a load of the other kids that were there, and that was a buzz. I remember that being such a buzz, and thinking, "No, really, this would be a great thing to do for a living." But it was really, I probably there was a guy at my school who was older than me, a couple of years older than me, called Jess Bailey, and we started making music together, and he was quite into bands like Steely Dan
Right.
and a lot of the Americana that was floating around at that
Yeah,
time,
yeah,
Little Feat and people like that.
yeah.
And we started to we I then joined a band of guys much older than me. They were in their late 20s, and I was 14, and they started to sing my songs that I was writing. And we were doing some covers as well, like as I mentioned, Steely Dan and people like that. And I was doing pub gigs then when I was 14, 15,
Really?
uh, around town, and it was quite good because I was too young to roadie really because I had to be home really quick. I left the gear to them at the end and scooted off home.
You got the best of it. So
But uh,
you,
but but that was really it. And then punk came along, of course, and that made me then I had to leave that band and form a different one.
right. So people like the Sex Pistols influenced you too.
Well, I saw the Sex Pistols play when I was 16. I went, they played in Islington where I lived, and they played at a cinema house. And it's a really famous gig called the Midnight Special, where um, the Pistols were supported by the Clash. I think it was the second ever Clash gig, and the Buzzcocks had come down from Manchester. And I went to this gig, and it was a rather extraordinary gig. I mean, it was in a cinema, and everyone was sitting down, and it wasn't sort of like as you know it, like a big punk kind of thrashing, kind of pogoing kind of gig.
Yeah.
It was quite arty, and they had their following at the front called the Bromley Contingent, which included Billy Idol and Susie Sue, or none of whom were musicians at that point. And and I thought this was mind blowing stuff, and I absolutely loved it. It was so exciting and full of great energy and aggression and sort of two fingers up to the establishment of music. And I had a rehearsal with my band the next day, and I went in and I said, "I'm leaving. I've just seen the Sex Pistols, and I don't want to be in this band anymore." And Steve Norman, who was also at the gig, and I went back to school in September after the summer holidays,
Huh.
and we started putting together what became Spandau Ballet.
Oh. So you were never really the shy and retiring type, huh?
Um, I don't know about that. I don't think I was. I was a child actor as well, so I was used to doing stuff like that. But I think I was pretty. I wasn't like, if you met me at a party when I was a kid, I wouldn't be the life and soul. I wasn't sitting there playing guitar to everyone, and I think I found, some relationships, especially with girls, say, impossible for a long time, and so I think there's always that thing about people who are musicians. Quite often, they're great on stage or in front of the camera, but maybe they're not so, forthcoming in real life.
Okay. And you said that you formed Spandau Ballet. Of course, Spandau Ballet weren't known as Spandau Ballet initially, were you? You'd gone through a couple of iterations in names. I think you were the Cut first, and then the
Yeah, we
Makers.
were playing punk, and we were playing
Right.
power pop, and we were without my brother. Actually, it was with a different bass player at that time because my brother
Uh-huh.
was just a kid. He was 16. He was 14. And then it wasn't until a couple of years later, a few years later, 78, when we first started. We were kind of almost giving up really with the band. It wasn't, we were sort of too young. in many ways. And then along came this amazing place to go, which was the Blitz Club on a Tuesday night. It was
Right.
a wine bar in town that was, taken over by two young kids, Russ Egan and Steve Strange, and it was a Bowie night. So it was all the kids who loved Bowie and were really into him and what he'd achieved in his glam rock era and his Berlin era. And I went to the first club actually was called Billy's. It was still in Soho, and it was a Tuesday night Bowie night. And I went there with Steve Norman and a couple of other friends, and uh, because we were introed by someone, and it was the most incredible experience I'd ever had. I walked down into this dark club, and the music was Kraftwerk or some other electronic German music, and there were these kids all dressed in sort of the most weirdest way I've ever seen, and it was kind of, they were kids who had grown up who were going to the local fashion school, St. Martin's School of Art, or they were just, it was all working class kids mostly, and they were making their own clothes or finding stuff they could dress up in and wearing makeup and doing this kind of slow jive to this pulsating music. And we started hanging out with those guys, and then the club moved to a place called the Blitz. It was still only a Tuesday night because that was the worst night of the week, so they were allowed to take it over. And we started creating quite a lot of attention in the media. Um, and there were a lot of really interesting kids in there who wanted to shape the next decade, who wanted to be the writers, who wanted to be the choreographers, the filmmakers, the graphic designers, and of course us as the house band.
It was
We
an
changed our
incredible. And that's when you changed your name to Spandau Ballet.
Yeah, that's when we became Spandau Ballet.
And where did the name come from?
A friend of ours called Robert Elms suggested it. We thought it sounded cool. Germany was definitely the hit place. Cabaret was the biggest film, but Berlin was where Bowie had done 3 albums. It sort of sounded post-punk, and he came up with it.
It was an amazing time to grow up, wasn't it? There was so much going on, and you were really in the right place at the right time for all this creativity.
You had to make that place, right? So we were part of the guys who were making that place happen. We were vocal about it. We 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 knew how to create a philosophy around it, a manifesto, if you like. And but what we didn't realize is there was a similar thing happening in Sheffield with the Human League, and down in an an ABC, and then down in Birmingham, a similar thing happening. The Rum Runner with Duran Duran. So there was something in the air.
Yeah,
But of course, we were from London. We were the London ones, so we were going to get more attention. And a woman here called Janet Street Porter made a documentary for youth television, um, a youth program called 20th Century Box, and it was about us and about our following. And it was put out in black and white, which added to the mystique.
right.
And of course, we were playing gigs. We wouldn't play anywhere that any other band played. We played places that we chose to play, that our crowd could turn up at, that was kind of exclusive and different. So we played a battleship on the Thames. We played warehouses. We played cinemas. We didn't play where anyone else played, and created events. And there was a big buzz about this. And then when the film came out, the documentary in 1980, the record companies saw it and were all over it. And we were then ready to be signed up, and to put this down on record.
So you talk about our crowd. I'd imagine that must have been swelling very quickly everywhere that you
Not
did play.
really.
Word was
Not
no.
really. No, 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 because we weren't out there trying to find an audience. We were. It was just the kids from that club, the Blitz, and it was them. And that could only expand as much as Steve Strange allowed it to, or as much as that
Uh,
building allowed it to. So when we
right.
went out, we just played to those guys. There was a new romantic kind of look, which is what it's called now. Um, but it was literally just like 100 people.
So how do you start to get more traction?
Well, we get it by by getting this documentaries on, by the fact that, you know, the press all want to know about us. This is limited access. This is the era of the mystique, when you could keep the mystique up. I mean, it's the same thing that happened. Pink Floyd before us, you know, in 1967, they were the house band of the UFO Club. Same thing happened with them. You know, a few years after that, you've got Middle Earth Club, and that's Bowie and T-Rex, right? So, you know, you go all the way back to the Rolling Stones, 1963 at the Railway
Right.
Tavern. You know, you go back before then, you got the Two Eyes Club in Soho with Shadows. You know, it's always been about a place and someone and a scene that is set around a place. And then the buzz begins. And the buzz started, and of course we uh we weren't a band that was going out trying to build bigger following and playing the marquee. That wasn't us, you know.
Right.
This was done from the press. So we were like, the press wanted to write about us, the music press wanted to know about us. You know, it was the beginning of a different time. The old black and white press was fading, and things like the face and color press was coming, and video was coming, and we could promote ourselves in different ways.
Did you realize that it was the start of a different era then, or only in
Yes, of
hindsight?
course.
You did.
No, 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 no. We'd be standing. I remember standing in that bar and saying, you know, these are, you know, we are the 80s. You know, this is, you know, all of us here. You know, we're determining, you know, you're going to be editing magazines. You're going to be doing the graphics for magazines or record sleeves. You know, there were kids, very ambitious, arty kids who, where else, you know, we knew that we were the definitely the fuel for the next decade.
What an amazing realization.
Well,
Uh,
where else were
I,
they going to? Someone had to do it. There was a history behind us of 20 years of people doing the same thing, and representing their generation in youth culture and pop culture.
right.
And it was always about that change. There was a, you know, whether it was coming out of glam rock, going into punk, and now it was someone else's turn. Well, it was going to be, you know, the scene that we were involved in.
And so, Gary, uh, on whose music did you base yourself? I mean, did the four of you
Yeah.
sit down and go, "We're going in this
Right.
direction"? This is sorry, I'm sorry. Did the five? Oh, see, I told you I can't talk even. I can't get it together at 9 p.m. Um, did the five of you sit down and go, "Oh, we're going to head in this direction, and this is what we're going to sound like musically"?
Well,
How did you
it was
work?
that was because Rusty Egan, the DJ at the Blitz and Billy's, and was playing all these things that were blessed by Bowie, really, but most of all German music. So Kraftwerk, La Dusseldorf, Neu. Um, then there was, you know, Iggy Pop, and there was Bowie, but Bowie's kind of Berlin period,
Yeah,
and there were some other music that was happening. You know, Being Boiled was a record that was already been produced by these young guys called the Human League. This is before they got the girls and became commercialized. And there were so it was like, we need to go and buy a synthesizer. We need to change. You know, John's going to play just dance rhythm, four on the floor on his drums, and I went and wrote a whole different set of songs that were based on the kind of music that we were hearing in that club.
I hear. Okay. And Martin had already joined you then?
Yeah, Martin was in the band. Yeah.
How did he come to become
Oh,
part of
you
it?
know, they reached the stage in the band in about 1977 when Steve Dagger, who was managing us, who was just a friend a few years older than us, who was part of the whole scene, he said, you know, we've got to get your brother in the band. And I said, why? He doesn't play anything. He said, but he's the best looking bloke we know, right? So I taught him the bass.
And we all know how that worked out. Oh, that's awesome. So, how would you describe what you were feeling in those times? I mean, you must have been so full of confidence, or at least massive bravado, at the helm of something new. It must have been incredibly exciting.
I don't know. You're just always, it's exciting, but you know, nothing's a guarantee. So you're just always, you know, you're just always trying to push and trying to get, you know, so we get a record label, and and we make our first album. And then all you're worried about is like, can we get on Top of the Pops, which was the big TV show here for music? And can we get in the charts? Is anyone interested? But what I loved is all the design that went with it. We had this great guy called Graham Smith who came out of the club scene as well. We said, right, you're doing the record sleeve. We had another guy from the club, and we said, you're doing the lights. And um, so we were interested in the label, right down to like saying we wanted our own label, which we called Reformation. And so there were it was a sort of 360 thing, really, where all of our friends were the only ones who could take pictures. Um, we used that pool from that club of young people who could design our clothes and make our look and everything. So that was really exciting. I remember that being very exciting. Yeah, of course. Previous to that, my parents were kind of involved as well because my mum was a
Really?
seamstress. And so I'd say, like, Mum, look, if I draw this on a piece of paper, can you make that pair of trousers for me? Can you make that jacket for me? So she was helping to design, to create our clothes out of our designs.
What an incredibly collaborative effort from everybody. And perhaps that was what was primarily responsible for the initial success. I mean, of course, the music was revolutionary and mainstream caught on very quickly, didn't
Well,
it?
I
That
think it was
first,
just, going on Top of the Pops and looking the way we looked, it was always going to be, to cut a long story short, it was always going to create attention. It pissed some people off and made other kids really excited. But I wanted that first Top of the Pops to be like when Bowie did Starman, and I saw Bowie doing Starman on Top of the Pops, and it changed my life at that point. And I thought, well, when we go on TV, we want this to change other 12-year-old, change other kids' lives, like it did, like Bowie did for me.
so what had you designed for yourselves for that appearance?
Oh, I can't remember, I think there was this kind of tartan was happening. And so Steve Norman's wearing a kilt. I'm wearing some military jacket that I'd found in an old Army and Navy store with jodhpurs and little kind of slippers as
Uh-huh.
well. I mean,
Uh,
it was like, and my
out
brother's
there.
wearing all these tartan sash, big tartan, kind of looked like he just walked off of some 17th century battle at Culloden. But it was all made by friends of ours, and it's all there
Wow.
on YouTube. You can go and
Yeah,
have a
yeah,
look.
yeah. No, we'll direct people there for sure. That's amazing. So, how did it change your world after that appearance? What
Well, it
happens
didn't,
next?
didn't really, because I'm still living at home. I'm living at home until I'm 22, 23. I live at home for the next two albums, three albums. I'm still living in a council house with my mum. The money's just isn't really flowing in, and it's getting plowed into whatever we're doing, whether it's, touring or, you know, finding an office to run. And so none of us were putting money really in our pockets that was going to change our lives. We had by the time the second album came, we had a tiny little slump where I think the third single off that album didn't get into the top 40. And it was really like, you know, is this it? And of course, I'm writing the song, so I'm feeling guilty. And, but I was going in different directions at that point. We'd sort of gone out of the electronica. We'd done a funk track, chant number one,
Uh-huh.
I don't need this pressure on. I was interested in, going in a different direction. In fact, the second side of our second album was more like Pink Floyd, funnily enough. And then I became friends with Claire Grogan and these guys from Altered Images, and I spent a lot of time up in Glasgow hanging out with them. And they were listening to a lot of soul music, which I kind of really enjoyed a lot in the 70s as well. I was a sort of soul boy for a period, and especially Marvin Gaye and Al Green. And I knew that I had to write a third album, but I was really inspired by that kind of music. And so there I am sitting at home in my council house in my bedroom, my mum and dad, in the living room, or my mum cooking in the kitchen, and
Uh-huh.
I'm sitting in the room trying to write songs. And I wrote. That's when I wrote Gold, and I wrote True, and all the songs on the True album.
Oh. And lots of girls parked outside your house waiting to
But
catch
not
a
at that
glimpse of
point.
you?
Not at that point. No, we
Not
weren't.
yet.
We, I don't think we'd broken into that mass market
Uh-huh.
until True, really. Before then, yeah, we were successful, but it was a different kind of audience.
Right,
And I think that was about to happen.
right. What were you writing about, Gary? Talk about that third album and your favourite songs on that. Where were you drawing inspiration for your lyrics?
Lyrics and music. Well, as I say, Marvin Gaye, True. If we look at True, what was that about? That was about a guy trying to write, that was about me trying to write a song about someone that they were, drawn to, attracted to, but not having the nerve to actually say who it was. Or so why do I find it hard to write the next line when I want the truth to be said? That was me talking to myself. It mentions Marvin Gaye. There's some lines from Lolita that I adapted, the book by Nabokov.
Uh-huh.
Seaside Arms comes from that book, and With a Thrill in My Head and a Pill on My Tongue comes from that book. And that was a book that I was given by someone who I was, having this kind of platonic relationship with, if you like. And so that was an inspiration. There were other places, I'm Gold. I'm trying to write a James Bond movie theme, I think. uh, but it was definitely more sort of melody first, songs first. That's really what the change was. Where before I was writing for the clubs and writing stuff that was more rhythmic and riff first, and
Right.
now these one I wanted to be songs that you could play on acoustic guitar and sing to someone without any other arrangements.
And were you mindful at that point about wanting radio play too?
I don't think I ever wrote cynically ever. It's never been, of course I wanted to keep the band going. Of course I
Right.
wanted it to be successful. You can either do these things or you can't. And when you're 23, I'm not a businessman. I'm just I'm writing what's coming from my heart and what
Yeah.
I'm enjoying to write. Oh my God, if we could decide what was successful or not as a songwriter, you know, we'd all be, hugely successful, but it's not like that. And you can't trust that one. People can smell cynicism.
Yeah, I agree. So, but after that album, though, you did start getting lots of radio play and you did start getting lots of
Well, I
mainstream
think what happened is we were successful in the UK, but that album made us successful in America and
everywhere. Yeah,
Europe and
that's
Australia and
right.
whatever. It's
That's right.
definitely changed everything for us, especially that song, because that song, went to number one in so many countries, and still to this day, True is like used. I mean, True and Gold are the two biggest songs from that album. So True gets used in American movies and commercials so much, and television. It's been on The Simpsons 4 times in different episodes.
Do you
And
still pinch yourself?
yeah, I appreciate how good that song's been to me. And then the other big thing with Gold is, if you look at my Instagram, you can see, but I'm standing in Wembley Stadium with my son at the end of a football match that Arsenal have just won, and 45,000 Arsenal fans are singing Gold. Um, they don't know I'm in the audience. They don't know I'm in the crowd. They don't even know who I am. Some of them don't even know who Spandau Ballet is. It's just become a folk song, and it gets used a lot in on the football field,
Yeah,
football terraces.
it's become an anthem. Right. How
Well, people normally
amazing.
pick a name of one of their favorite players into the title, and then the rest is is the same as the normal song.
Right. So Spandau Ballet went for around 11 years. What brought you to an end eventually? Because it was 1983 when True came out, and by 1990 you were done.
Well, I didn't want to do the band after that for quite a while. I mean, I'd lost interest in doing it. Through the Barricades, I think was our kind of peak is for me. I mean, that tour was amazing. That whole, um, I don't think it did so well in Australia, but it did really well in across Europe. And I still think that's the best Spandau song, Through the Barricades, and lyrically and musically, I think it's the most complete song that I ever wrote for the band. You know, it's a song that was inspired by a trip to Belfast that I made when I was playing, and taken to a friend's grave who had been shot in the Troubles.
Mm.
And I wrote this song about, you know, the a sort of Romeo and Juliet song about a boy and a girl who were obviously on opposing sides in Northern Ireland. Um, you know, we played it there, which was amazing, the reaction we got. And then a few years later, we're in Berlin and the wall's coming down, and then we play it that night, and it had just the same resonance there, as it had in Ireland. And you know, it's a song that I'm hugely proud of. And then we did another album after that, and I just think it felt like I was just getting frustrated by being the only songwriter in the group, and just we weren't getting on as well. And you know, things were changing. The rave culture was happening. It was 1990, and I'd been offered a movie, The Craze.
So it was the turn of the decade again. It was time for change
I
again.
think it felt like that, but also my brother and I had just done a big film here called The Craze, which was about the Cray twins, true story about two gangsters in London in the 60s. And and I just think it was a good time for me to just drop out for a bit. And I went to live in Hollywood, and you know, pretty soon after that got The Bodyguard, and you know, with Whitney Houston and Kevin Costner.
Amazing.
And I was then and then I did a film for Quentin Tarantino, and some TV stuff in America. And you know, I saw myself, you know, getting back into acting, and I put my guitar away. I was a bit cynical. And then in 93, 94, my marriage broke down. And the first thing I reached for was my guitar. And I ended up recording my first solo album, Little Bruises.
So you were acting at the same time as you were with Spandau, or had you given up the acting
No, I'd given up. You know, I did
and
it as
then
a
picked it
kid,
up
and then
again?
I did it as a kid. And then my brother also was a child actor. And then the craze happened, and that was right in 1989, 1990, when Spandau was still about to go on tour. And there was a lot of friction, I think, within the band because we'd done this movie, and it wasn't a popular thing amongst the rest of the group for us to do that, because I think it held up the tour that was about to happen, and
Right.
there was a conflict. And and I think that was the other reason. And then my wife was also an actress, and she had just got a part in Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. And so we headed off to Hollywood. And while I was there with her filming, I did an audition for Kevin, and got The Bodyguard.
Yeah.
So
What was
so
that like for you?
that was cool. I mean, it was great. I mean, it was it was great to get to know Whitney. It took, you know, 4 months of shooting, and she was absolutely wonderful. And I loved being hanging out with her. And she was a she was clean at that time. You know, she hadn't met Bobby Brown,
Right.
and she would hang out with the crew and chat and sing in the makeup trailer gospel, and it was a great privilege. And yeah, it was a good part of my life. Great
Yeah.
memory.
And what were the other guys doing while you were doing that? Just kind of waiting for you
Well,
to come home?
I don't know what they were doing then.
Right.
We
You'd
sort of
had a
fall.
bit of a fallout. I wanted to ask you though, you said that you'd been the only songwriter for Spandau Ballet. Was that because you'd wanted to be the only songwriter, or nobody else really had the aptitude?
Well, no one was coming in with songs,
Right.
so
Right. It was left to
and I
you.
like and I was never the person to want to write with other people. I'm not good at writing with other people. I've tried it, and
Uh-huh.
it doesn't suit me at all. I just think for me a song is the music and the lyrics are entwined. They're one and the same thing, and they're normally, for me, music is writing songs is about solving problems now. For me, I think it changed when I wrote Little Bruises, and I wrote an album that was, I suppose, in many ways inspired quite a lot by my breakup of my marriage. And uh and that's those songs were therapeutic for me in answering questions about my life and where I was and who I was. And I think that was a wake up call because I suppose it started with Through the Barricades, but the idea of writing songs that were more meaningful lyrically um, was not what I was doing when I was in Spandau Ballet, and I think it was because I was writing for someone else to sing. Um, but now it's as a solo artist, the three albums that I've made, have all been there to, because I needed to write them, and I couldn't imagine someone else being in that room writing with me and coming up with ideas when they don't understand why I'm writing it.
So they've always been very personal and very close
I
to your
think
heart, all
since
the songs.
certainly since Spandau Ballet, yeah. I
Right,
mean, yeah.
right. Well, I mean,
And
and
historic,
they're
about me, very much about me, but in a universal way. I mean, it would be dumb for any writer to write a song that was so specifically about them that no one else could relate to it. But so I think all these, whatever crisis we all go through as humans who want to write, these are universal problems.
and you're luckier than most where you've got that outlet, the ability to write it and get stuff down onto paper. It must be a very cathartic sort of process.
And I think the last, if you don't mind, and I talk briefly, talk about this album that
Yes,
I've
please.
got
This
out.
is your third album.
Yeah, and this, yeah, it's called This Destination. Um, is I think probably about 2 or so years ago, I'd been on the road a lot with Nick Mason because I play with Nick Mason from Pink Floyd. We played in Australia.
Yeah.
I've been doing that for 6 years. Um, before the uh, before the pandemic and after, and since we're still playing. Um, I've been away a lot, the most I'd ever toured. I mean, I've done 32 countries with Nick touring and spending quite a few months away. I think that makes me feel a bit vulnerable. I think there's a certain thing about being at a certain age that makes you aware of your mortality. I lost my parents 16 years ago within 4 days of each other,
I'm sorry.
and I don't think I fully grieved that. And I was a couple of years ago feeling hugely anxious, and I don't know where that was coming from. The first time in my life, and it was kind of expressing itself physically. And I did some therapy, which was helpful. But what was really helpful was writing an album about those crises. We all sit and doom scroll. We've all got the global problems of the world all on our doorstep, in our face, in our bedroom, in our bed, when we're lying there on our phones. And that's hugely affecting. And I don't know. I approach. When I go in and write, it's often to try and make myself feel better, or to put it in perspective, or to find metaphors that suit the emotions that I'm feeling. And some of the album came out of that sort of crisis, if you like, and which I think many of us feel. And then it turned into an incredibly positive experience for me. The last song I wrote was called This Destination, which is about really me. It's a kind of love song, but it's saying, I'm always here for you if you're away. But I'm really, for me, that's music. That's what's there for me. That's the place I have to go to get back to be healed every time.
I read about you that you'd got caught up with the 24-hour news cycle, I guess, during the pandemic, like so many of us did. There's no wonder
And
that,
still do, and still do,
yeah, I
it's,
know.
it's like having the fires in Ukraine and
Yeah,
Gaza, all of them are here,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And I suppose there's a sort of, only so much you can take before you feel that it's your own crisis. And there's enough going on in anyone's own family, personal family, isn't there? There's enough going on that's really difficult anyway.
So have you found that you've had to switch it all off? And not, I mean, the
I
old
don't
adage
know.
about you can't control, don't worry about what you can't
Yeah,
control.
I
Nobody,
try.
none of us.
I think, you try, but you want to be aware of what's going on at the same time. I think, as I said, you know, songwriting is my nurse.
I think you're very lucky to have the ability. And this album, there's 11 tracks all up, and you describe it as being the most personal and the most beloved of anything that you've written in your career.
Yeah, there's songs on everything I've done that I like, but this is a lot of these songs are about my past as well. There's one that I'm very close to. Have you heard it, by the way? Did you
I
get to
have
see?
heard it, absolutely.
There's one called Work, which was about. I suppose it's about the commitment that my father gave to working in a factory when he was a kid, when he we were I was a kid, and my mom who worked really hard. She worked with disabled children and what she to put food on the table. And my dad suffered a nervous breakdown because he didn't feel like he was bringing home enough money for the family, and he was stifled in this job he was in. And that kind of comes into the song, and then it's really about me saying, what kind of worth have I got? How can I live up to them, to what they've shown me? Am I good enough? Am I a man? Am I good enough for my family? And and I think we all, you know I think we can all feel that. you know do we are we the decent people?
Yeah.
And it's about working it out, trying to make it work. And so I think it it sounds very particular, but I think it's a song that everyone can feel. I actually had a really fun experience because I was trying to write a song, and I'd reached a little bit of an impasse, and a very successful artist here called Richard Hawley rang me out of the blue, and he said, "What are you doing, man?" I said, "I'm just in my room trying to write a song." He goes, "How are you getting on?" I said, I'm not." He goes, "What are you writing it on, piano or guitar?" I said, "On piano." So okay, he goes, "Go to your piano." And he's got this amazing deep voice. "Go to your piano." And he said, "Close your eyes. Oh, put your hands out above the piano." He said, "Okay, I'm going to go now, and you're going to write a brilliant song." And I sent the song to him a few days later, and he was knocked out, I think, But he definitely inspired me, kicked me up the arse.
We all need that sometimes, don't we? Gary, so I mean, all these questions that you ask yourself on this album, have you found all the answers to them?
Yeah, I think you do in a way. You find solace. Yeah, it's a bit like going to see the therapist. They're not going to talk much. You're going to talk, right? So,
Correct.
and you feel better by putting a finger on it. Um, and the whole album isn't. I'm making I don't want it to sound depressing because it certainly isn't. You know.
It's not depressing, it's actually thought-provoking. And I think it stems from your own, well, it's all about your thoughts, isn't it? And what it does to a listener is is project those and starts us all thinking too, because we can obviously relate to what you've been going through and the
You
questions
know
that
what I
you're
can't
asking.
do. What I can't do is go into to write a song and think, right, I've got to write a love song. I'm going to write a love song. Of course, I'm in love with my wife. We've been together 24 years, but there's only so many love songs one can write, and before they're meaningless. So I think you have to. It's harder to write to know what to write about, but I think some of them are story songs. Some of them about my youth, some of them about other people. There's one about the art world, rather cynically. I'm writing about the art world. There's one about two people who get together and write songs together. And that's a fun kind of song. And that's a story song. And I love also writing songs that are not attached to me. But I
Yeah.
think if I'm going to sing word, the I word has to be meaningful. It can't be made up. It can't be just. So if it's not about me, it tends to be third person.
I think my favorite song on the album is the final track, I Know Where I'm Going.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think you found that you know where you're going, didn't you?
I Know Where I'm Going is an interesting song because I still really don't know fully what it's about, but I can see the setting, and it's as it's expressed in the song. It's a kind of mystical song and a metaphorical song, and it's me looking out to an island that I'm going to go to, and I'm going to get there, and I'm going to climb the lighthouse, and I'm going to send back messages to whoever's listening. And I suppose it's about mortality. It's about spiritual kind of peace. Um, I'm not a religious person, but I'm very much connected to nature, and I love exploring the wilds of nature and islands and mountains. and I always have been loved being lost in that environment. I also really love my favorite one of my favorite films is called I Know Where I'm Going. It was made in the 40s by Powell and Pressburger, and it's about a woman who is going to fall in, who's going to marry a man who lives on this outer Hebridean Scottish island, and she tries to get there, but she can't, and she falls in love with someone else in the end. I love the imagery in that film, the black and white imagery, and but the title kept going around in my head, and and that song popped out all in one. It wasn't lyrics first, it wasn't music first. It all came out all in one. I remember writing it one afternoon, and my wife came back, and I played it to her, and I could see she really, I could see she was moved by it,
Yeah,
and I was moved by it, and it could only go last on the album.
yeah. Great place for it. Gary, you've written an autobiography. I know this much, from Soho to Spandau. Is there another book in you? Or what does come next for you?
I think I might, I'd like to try and play some of this live, this album. So that's on my mind. I'm going to do some more shows with Nick, doing the early Pink Floyd stuff that we do of his catalog. And so that's still going to happen. And of course, the podcast that I do all the time
You're
with Guy
still
Pratt.
enjoying that?
Guy's great. Guy played with Pink Floyd. He played with David Gilmour, and he plays with Source Full of Secrets with me. He's one of my best friends. He plays, I think, on about 7 tracks on this album. Great bass player, and I still enjoy it. Yeah, I mean, Nick's going to be 81 in a couple of weeks, but if he can still get on the drum kit, which he can, I saw him the other day. He's fantastic shape. So, yeah, I love doing that. I mean, I think it's really brought me a different audience. I think, I'm someone now who's seen as a guitar player and a frontman and a singer and all those things that maybe I once wasn't seen at in the Spandau Ballet setup.
Correct. And is there anything left on your bucket list still to do, or you're
I like doing
complete?
theatre. I always like doing theatre.
Theatre.
I do quite a bit of theatre here. Um, Harold Pinter is someone I've done 3 of his plays, and in the West End here in London, and that I'm always looking for because I love doing that. It's not really. But what some of my bucket list is to stay alive. Stay healthy, stay fit. Stay on my bike, which I love doing.
Fabulous. So far, so good. Gary Kemp, thank you so much for your time. What a pleasure. Who knew you were such an amazing all-rounder? Congratulations. What a talent.
Nice to talk to you.